short studios. Please let's give him a round of applause. Sir, you can come forward. Over to you. You have like 40 minutes, then you'll get 20 minutes question.
Good morning, everyone. Studio Otherwise, the name as earlier mentioned. I representing Black Eyes Animation Studios. Alright, today I'll be talking on what I've tagged 3D, working in 3D animation space. Pardon me, please, I actually added the word space to it so that it kind of streamlined, we know exactly what we're doing. So working in 3D animation space. I've tried as much as possible to divide this into, break it down into 4 parts. Next slide, please. Into 4 parts. And the 4 parts, don't be surprised if I start talking about it, they are actually broken down further. You know, I don't know if you remember these days when we're growing up, a teacher will walk up into the class and be like, your exam is going to be very simple. I'll give you 2 questions. And then all of us will be happy. And then by the time you get to the exam hall, you realize that number 1 has 1A, 1A1, 1A2, and all. So by the time I start the breakdown, you understand exactly what I'm saying. So the very first part is why 3D animation? Why did I decide to partially shut the door to architecture and then embrace 3D animation? We'll talk about that. And then the next is please next slide, please. The next is the requirement. What exactly does it take for you to be able to function perfectly in this space? We'll talk about that. And then if eventually you're able to meet up with the requirements, you need to understand the process, because everything that has to do with life has a process. Even life itself has a process. There's a point in time where our parents met, and there's a point where they gave birth to us, and then they sent us to Simi and the rest of them. And then now we're here. So we go to understanding the process. And the last part is the conclusion. To be honest, I tried to figure my head what to call this part. Conclusion, tips, advice, whatever. But we'll just leave it as conclusion. But at this part, we'll do a quick wrap up of what we talked about earlier, and then just chip in 1 or 2 words to, close up the whole thing. And then finally, there's a project we've been working on for a while now. For the first time on the big screen in the public space, I'll be showing you a tape of it after the whole thing. I hope I have time for that. What I'll be showing is not the teaser, it's not the trailer, just character review. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy the flow. Thank you. So why 3D animation space? For Tunde Lua, why 3D animation space? Next slide. A lot of things happen in our environment, a whole lot of things. And then one of the things I like to call our attention to is you telling someone a story and then hearing later that while that person is sharing the same story to somebody else, it's either they've added to the content or subtracted from it, which happens, right? But have we ever tried to imagine what would be responsible for this act? Why can't people just say it the way they've heard it? Can it be that difficult? It could be. Now, let me share a story with us that illustrates why it can be difficult. There's an elderly man I used to know a long time ago, whom we knew with nothing except his house and a donkey. Peaceful, easygoing person. And then a fateful day came when he came out of his house angrily, and he dragged this donkey forcefully and angrily from his house to the riverside, and eventually forced the donkey to drink water. That's the end of the story. Now, while I'm verbally expressing myself, I can bet that each person seated here, if you're following the story, you're creating images in your mind of what the man looks like, what the donkey looks like, and how the entire scenario played out, which is normal. Now, each person's imagination differs from one person to another, and that's because of who you are, where you've been, where you're living, and your exposure to life generally. Now, let me quickly cite an example. If you stayed all your life in the desert part of the world, and I just talked about the riverside, the kind of image that your mind will project will be different from somebody that stayed his or her life in the riverine area. Same verbal expression, different imaginary interpretations. And I can also bet again that everybody's imagination, 0.01% of everybody's imagination will probably tally with mine as the author and the narrator of the story. So that means what I have in mind as regards the story is not what you have in mind. Now, should you want to share the same story with somebody else, you will do so based on how your mind has pictured it. Remember what we're talking about? Why did I decide to jump into 3D animation? So I'm just trying to break it down. So I've told you a story, and then you have a different idea about the story, which is quite different from what I have in mind. You develop the understanding based on who you are and your exposure to life. Now let's create a scenario that the screen behind me is actually showing the illustration of what I've just verbally expressed. Then we will all see together with our eyes what the man looks like, what the donkey looks like, and how the whole thing played out. And that's the power of art. So my definition of art is please next slide. My definition of art is the visual illustration of one's thought or one's idea. If I've conceived it in my heart and I can present it to you, and then you can see it, then that makes it an artwork. I came all the way down with this guy. I don't know if a lot of people saw me walking around with this guy. This is an artwork, actually, molded, carved, whatever, by someone, And the look at this thing tells you what it represents. If you're seeing it for the first time, you probably think it's one idol because people worship. But if you're familiar with the image that this thing represents, you know exactly what the language this thing is talking about. And that's because the artwork is detailed. That's why you can identify with what it's representing. Now, if this little guy here decides to turn his head and moves his hands, do I pray it doesn't? Because if he tries it, Alright, well let's assume he turns his head and he moves his hand. Then it becomes more detailed. If you're seeing it for the first time, trust me, you will know that this thing does not represent an idol or a static object, but it represents something that moves. Then that takes me to my definition of animation. Animation for me then is a visual illustration or expression of one's thought or one's idea with motions. Now the motions at the back is the detail that we added to the artwork that we started with. I was about to increase the Lord. So with the details that we started with. Now, if I add the prefix 3D to the word animation, I'm not sure if the slide is following. Okay, fine. If I add the word 3D to the prefix 3D to the word animation, then I have a three-dimensional visual illustration of one's thought, my thoughts, your thoughts, and then with motion. So with that, I've added extensive details to the artwork that we started with. Now, why is this important? I'm an architect, or I used to be an architect, or maybe I'm still an architect anyway. So, and then I have stories to tell. I have audience that want to pass the message across to. Initially, when we started using softwares, computers for architectural presentation, we started with something called CAD applications. And then I realized that most presentations, you're trying to tell stories to an audience, and most of them, even the so-called well-educated, find it difficult understanding what we're saying. They find it difficult understanding what we're saying or what we're trying to pass across to them. And then we move from CAD application to BIM applications, which shows them, okay, this is what the building will look like if you're standing on the other side of the road. And then we speak less English while doing our presentation. From there, we move to what we call architectural visualization, which is a form of 3D animation. And then we realize at that point that we don't even need to talk. You just play the video. The audience are watching, you probably cross your leg on your conference table, chewing cookies and then drinking coffee, and then your message is easily passed across to them. Now, that is why I decide to tell my stories to my audience using this format. A lot of people hear the word animation or 3D animation, and what comes to mind is filmmaking. It is true, but not completely true. Now, 3D animation or animation as a whole is actually a storytelling tool. And trust me, as human beings, we all have stories to tell. We all have, sorry, I think this slide is faster than myself. All right, we all have stories to tell. And most of our stories might not end up at the cinema screen. If I'm telling a story as an architect to an audience, no matter how much time I spend on the details and the rendering, trust me, nobody's going to go to the cinema to pay for it. If you are into fashion and you're telling a story to your audience about how a fabric will feel on them using a clothes simulation application to tell your story, no matter how much time you spend on that thing, trust me, that story will not get to the cinema. So instead of seeing this as a filmmaking tool, I want us from today probably change our mindset about that and then see it more as a storytelling tool. And the fact that we all have stories to tell, this is one of the best ways. Please don't quote me, I'm not saying the best way. This is one of the best ways, to convey your message to your audience. And man, being a three-dimensional being, appreciates and then comprehend messages passed across to them in this format than any other format. I think that's clear enough. So I move to the next slide. That's a requirement. Okay. So if eventually you're able to convince yourself that, okay, you have stories to tell and then you want to tell this story in 3D animation format, there are requirements. There are things that you need to put in place, to make things work. And I call them the PFP, which is the first P is the passion. You need to have passion for it. There should be something inside you that's burning and yelling and pushing you towards this craft at all time. A lot of people reach out to me, DMs and emails, and they want to learn, please, you do trainings and all that, and ask them one question which most people fail. And the question is, why do you want to learn this craft? And most of them will go, I'm the breadwinner of my family, I'm the coffee winner of my family, the milk winner of my family, I want to triple my hustle, which are valid points. But as far as I'm concerned, those are failed answers. Now, because if you jump into this craft because you want to make money, trust me, in no time you will jump out of it. We all know how businesses is. Sometimes your table is so full that you call on your colleagues, Ababawa, please, I have this thing, I need to make deadline. Please, you help me with this, you help me with this. Maybe that particular time your mechanic came to check your car, join, please, assist with this. You call as much people as possible to help you deliver. And then sometimes your table is extremely light. That you probably just try to have a chewing stick in your mouth, standing on the balcony, and then looking at the sky, wondering how much you shake about your lawn. It can be that bad. So if you jump into the craft because you want to make money, at that point when your table is light, trust me, you will run out. Now, and then it is the passion in you that keeps you in check. It is the passion in you that tells you, now that your table is light, equip yourself, develop yourself, prepare yourself, meet with other people, and then plan, because the job will come. It's certain, next job will come. So it's that period that you prepare yourself and plan, and then, engage yourself in activities that will prepare yourself for the next big job that will come. And then while we are preparing and engaging yourself, please engage your clients as well. I'll send emails to them. We're still here, we're doing this, and we never close shop, so that they can always remember you once an opportunity comes. Please, next slide. So aside the passion, the next is the fund. If you really want to work in this space, you need money. And I'm not saying this to scare anybody, I'm just saying it because that's just the reality. Setting up, let me just cite an example. Setting up a 2-man 3D animation studio is millions. Just 2-man studio is million. If you're talking about the application, the kind of application that we use at Black Eye Studios is $1,500 for 2 systems. So if we put that aside, then the 2 systems probably will be about, the 2 systems will probably be, let's say 900 each on an average. That's 1.8 million. We're already talking about millions. If you're fortunate enough to say, okay, you want to take it further by getting a mocap kit, and speaking of mocap kit, oh guys is here. My studio too happens to be one of the studios in Nigeria that have mocap kits. And the most effective, the cheapest, most effective mocap kit is about $5,000. and let's say you have 2 of that, that's $10,000 plus 1,500, that's $11,500 plus your 1.8 million, you're talking about millions. So you will need money. Igbo people say actually Omego, I don't know if that's right, but man, you will need money in this business. Now, aside the fact that you need money for the gadgets and the systems and everything, you will need money also. Please slide, please. You also need money for Please, next slide. Next slide. Pass forward to the next slide. Next slide. Okay, rendering. Yeah. You also need money for rendering. 3D animation is kind of, I won't say complicated, but it's not as easy as any other form of animation. Now you can spend 4 hours preparing the job and then spend 4 times 10 hours doing the rendering if you're using your local system. So what we do basically is we package our finished job and then send to a render firm, which costs money. So a render firm is a facility that is built with servers and all they do there is just rendering. So and then you send your job to them, the render is like taking our crude oil for you to be refined and then sending us PSM and petroleum product back. So that's what we do with render firm. So with that as well, you pay money. And the last part of this, next slide, is the power. This I don't think we need further explanation because we're all in this country and then we have an idea of how power is at home and at work. So please let's move on to the next slide, please. So the last P is patience. You know, I said PFP, passion, fund, and then patience. And the patient part is, the first part is the return on investment. If eventually you are able to put these millions in your studio, please project your mind on a long-term thing for your return on investment. Now the reason being that if you follow up with the session earlier today, a lot of people that spoke, people that actually talk this morning, talk about the fact that our environment presently is yet to appreciate and understand this craft. So the kind of value that people put as to what you're giving them is not measurable. You understand? So if you're putting millions in it and then you're expecting it to come back at like you're switching on lights, it's not going to work like that. It could actually work like that if you meet up with clients, if you meet up with audience that understands it and then you're willing to give you the value for that thing. That can actually work. Now, a couple of months ago, please next slide, we were fortunate to be part of a project organized by some black communities in Alberta, Canada. And they ran a 13-episode campaign as regards COVID-19. The first set was on COVID-19 awareness and prevention, which we did for them. And then they were in partnership with Health Alberta, Health Canada, and Alberta Health Services, Health Canada, and then Red Cross in Alberta. Now, when we submitted the first episode, we got some part of the script misinterpreted. And then they called our attention to it that, wow, this is not what we meant when we said this. So I personally replied the email and I told them to ignore whatever we've sent to them, we'll modify, edit, and then we'll resend to them the right thing. But they said no. They said continue with the other 12 episodes, we'll take this the way it is. And I was wondering that when they gave their reason, I realized they understand what it takes for this thing to be produced. Now they said, if we ask you to amend this thing, you'll probably be spending the same time you've used in making it, which will affect the other 12 episodes. So they said, we'll take this like that, but make the corrections on the other 12 episodes that you've been working on. So those are the kind of clients that understand, the kind of audience that understand what it takes for you to actually produce this thing. And trust me, most of the time, because they understand it, they are always willing to give you the right value for this. So if you're fortunate enough to meet up with this kind of clients, then your return on investment can come sooner than you least expected. But to be on the safer side so that we will not get high blood pressure, it is always nice for us to project a long-term thing, and then that will keep us all from troubles. Then the last part is the process. as I said earlier, 3D animation requires a whole lot, you know, and then the process itself, if you're not the kind of person that have suru, like Yoruba people will say, if you don't have patience, then don't just dabble into it, because the whole thing involved in it takes time. So speaking of process, that will take us to the next part. Next slide, please. And that's understanding. No, next slide. We're done with all this. Understanding the process. Sorry, I think the upper part is called chopped off. Understanding the process. Now, there are actually 3 major known processes. Now, and then everybody, every individual, every studios have been able to turn these 3 into, sub headings to suit their pipelines and their workflow and everything. But the 3 major things is the pre-production stage, the production stage, next slide, and then the post-production stage. So these are the 3 key things involved in the process of making 3D animation content. Then, for Black Eyes Animation Studios, if you're breaking the next slide, the first thing in the pre-production is the story. Your story must be interesting, the story must be captivating, which is the first step. I was in a gathering a couple of months ago, and one of the big shots in Nigerian entertainment industry came to give a speech, Mr. Femi Udubeli, and he said something about telling a story. He said there are 3 ways of telling captivating story. One is you're telling the story of what has happened, or you're telling the story of what will happen, because people want to know. And then he said, if you're telling the story about now, make sure it's something people can learn from. So we've been able to adopt that to our style and our pattern of work, and it's been helping. So after the story, please, next slide, is the scripting. So once the story is being divided, is being decided upon by the production team, the next thing is to call a script writer to develop the script. So that is when the whole idea is turned into a manual. Then concurrently, while that is going on, we go into our conceptual development. Conceptual development is where we have a character design, a set design based on what the story is all about. Please move on. After the character design and the set design and everything, we do our storyboarding. Now, storyboarding is when you turn the script and your conceptual designs into a comic-like form. So you have the script and then the story in a form where people can just flip through from page to page in a pictorial form. So we do that during our production stage. And the next thing after that is we call voiceover artists to come on board, and then we extract their voices for further use. Now, at this point, when the voiceover artists come on board, what we do basically at Black Eye Studios is get them to the studio, and then prepare the whole thing, and then they act based on what the script is saying and how the storyboard has described the feelings. So after which we move to, next thing, we move to cinematic. Sorry, in this go. Hello, can anybody hear me?
Yes.
All right, sir. So the next thing is we move to cinematic. Cinematic for us is where we overlay the storyboarding and then the dialogues to generate time. Now, if I want to do a 1-hour film, thank you very much. If I want to do a 1-hour film, is a cinematic level that are assigned time to all the scenes in the storyboard with the dialogues as well. So if the whole thing is more than 1 hour, then I have to chop off the part that we don't need, or we might probably just do without. If it's less than 1 hour, then we'll add some other clips to it to make it 1 hour. But cinematic actually is the point where we overlay our storyboarding with the dialogues that we have with time. Then for us at Black Eyes Animation Studio, that ends our pre-production stage. Then at production stage, we start our modelings. That is where we do the character modelings and then the set modelings based on the conceptual designs that we had initially, and then based on the story as well. Then the next slide, please. After that, we do, okay, next slide. Okay, then we do character animation. Now, character animation is the part where we put the character in the set and then we make him or her react according to the story with the environment. Let's take, for example, in the script, it says Bola is standing at the bus stop talking to BC and then he's leaning on the pole. It is at this point that we make this whole thing happen. It's actually a long process, but it's about the most critical of all. So after the animation, the next slide. All right, props animation. Yeah. Props animation is, let's take for example, in the scene, somebody's about to open a door, and the description says he pushed the knob and then pushed the door as well. So that means there are two things: the knob needs to be animated, and then the door needs to be animated. So at this point is where we do all animation work, basically. Next slide. All right. In Black Animation Studio, we do more of simulations because our pattern and our style of animation is close to realism. So we do more of simulation. No, so our soft body physics simulation is the part where you know a character is moving and then the clothes is moving alongside with it. So that is the part where we have the clothes and then the hair simulation. She's talking and then her hair is moving accordingly to the body movement. So that's our soft body physics simulation. Then we have rigid body simulation. Rigid body simulation is a car hitting, an example actually, a car hitting a block wall. What will be the impact of the car on the block wall? And then what will be the impact of the block wall on the car? So that explains that simulation system. Then we talk about the next slide, please. That's the ragdoll simulation. Now, for us, ragdoll simulation is like the example I just cited. A car hits a block wall, and then the block wall will probably be broken. Some part of the car will probably be dented. That is the rigid body simulation. Then the ragdoll is what is the impact on the character in the car itself. There's going to be some kind of body movement, So we allow the computer's AI to generate that, because if you want to do that, that might take you a whole lot of time to achieve. So for all the simulations are actually done with the computer's AI system. So we allow it to generate it. Now, the disadvantage of simulation is sometimes it doesn't come out the way you want. So you just need to keep trying until you get something close to what you have in the script and according to the story. So let's move to the next slide, please. The crowd simulation. Crowd simulation I'm just trying to cite an example. If Bola and BC are walking on the street in the afternoon, definitely they can't be the only one on the street. Now, every other characters, every other activities around them, is actually done with crowd simulation. So every other person is going about their businesses, like Bola and BC is not existing. So those are done with crowd simulations. And after crowd simulation, the last part for us is the lighting. Lighting in storytelling is a different ball game and a different topic entirely, But because lighting itself is a storytelling within storytelling. Now, what that means is the kind of light you use, the color, the intensity, the positioning actually matters per scene. So at this point, we decide, okay, where are we putting the light? Where are we casting the shadow? What kind of color are we using in terms of the light and everything? So once all this is done, then we'll do, next slide, we'll do our rendering. So the rendering that we do as at that particular time is the rendering that I said take a whole lot of time. So we'll package the whole thing, that's the rendering. So we'll package the whole thing and then send to a render farm, which they help us render, and then they send it back to us for post-production. Now let's move to our post-production stage. So the first thing on our post-production stage is the compositing and the editing. Almost all these things are done in bits and pieces, all the scenes and everything. So at this stage, we compile everything together, arrange them accordingly, in accordance to the story, you understand, and then we have them laid up. And then if there's going to be anything like VFX effects and everything, it's at this point that we add those to the effect. And then next slide. After all this has been done, we add sound. The sound effects, the foley's, the music, and all. If you're shooting a live film, and then somebody's driving in the car, for example, if you have a very good mic, you can capture the sound of the engine if you need the sound of the engine. But if you're doing animation, first of all, there's even no car. So you have to generate the sound of the car. You have to generate the sound of the environment, which is a different ball game entirely. So that is the part where we add all those things. But you make sure that every other thing is being done, and then you now start adding sound to it. And sound and the background music and the rest of them. Then we do color grading. Now, because of the process is kind of complex, sometimes you could have a whole lot of people working on it. There's a project we had a couple of months back. We had a studio in Abuja that helped with some scenes, although we use the same application. And then by the time they brought their own in from Abuja, there was this slight difference in color and then grading compared to the ones we have in Lagos. So, as at this point, the color grading that you tie all the scenes together with a particular feel, so that by the time they are coming out, they come out as a monolithic object, and then you won't even see the difference after all. So that takes care of the color grading. After the color grading, next slide, we'll do the final rendering. Thank God. I'm done. So they do the final rendering.
That 15 minutes then.
Are you serious?
For questions.
Okay, so we'll do the final rendering. Then once the final rendering is done, your story is ready for your audience to see. Now let's quickly run through the last part, the conclusion, as I said earlier. Now the conclusion, as I said, is maybe a tip, maybe advice, whatever. The first part, we've talked about the passion, fund, and patience. We've talked about that. The next that we need to talk about is perfecting a process. Now, 3D animation is huge, as I said earlier. It's a big thing. So it's always advisable for you to take one of those processes that we've explained and then master one. Now, it's good to be a generalist. Generalist is you know about everything. It helps. But it's always good to perfect a particular process so that you can function in a larger organization. It helps a lot. Next slide, please. No competitions. A lot of people have been talking, earlier today that, you need to mingle, we need to operate more as a team and everything. As far as this race, as far as this craft is concerned, it is always nice for you to compete with yourself. You can look at every other person's job and learn from it. It is good. But be your own competition. My own saying has always been, I want my recent job to see my previous job as a beautiful trash. Now, beautiful in the sense that we've learned a lot from it and then we've moved on. Trash in the sense that we want to look at it and be like, did we actually do this? So be your own competitor. Then professionalism. You need to add a whole lot of professionalism to this. And what's professionalism? Professionalism is the way at which you respond or you communicate with your colleagues and then your audience, and then keeping records. What do I mean by that? I had a client a couple of months ago who was giving me brief via phone call, and I said, madam, please send an email. And then apparently when she sent the email was actually different from what she told me verbally on the phone. So if I had taken a verbal instruction and then moved with it, I would have run into trouble. So professionalism is keeping track of your conversation, especially with clients, keeping track of your conversation with your colleagues as well. Now, it can go as little as sending thank you receipts. If they pay, like you receive an advance payment or whatever, as little as saying, okay, thank you, we received this sum of amount, or thank you, we're expecting the balance in the next 25 years, something like that. It's just keeping records of things. That's professionalism. In this field, we have a lot of talented people who are less professional, and that kind of limits the way and the level at which people can operate. So if you add professionalism to your talent, you'll probably be operating at this level in this craft. And then the last thing is you need to be abnormal. Yes, when it comes to this thing, I'm saying it and I'm saying it emphatically, you need to be crazy. You need to create things that people will look at you and be like, oh, Is there something sparkling in your head? Now, I can understand if people are frowning at me now, because in this part of the world, we've attached abnormality with negativity. Now, abnormality for me is creating a statement that calls for immediate attention. Let me cite an example. If I wake up on a Sunday morning and I pick up my rosary, no offense to all Catholic people here, all Christians, please. I'm just citing an example. I pick up my rosary and I'm dressed for church, to go to a Catholic church. And I'm entering the church through the door that is closest to the altar. Please close your eyes for 2 seconds and imagine this. I stepped into the church with my rosary on and celestial garments. What do you think will happen? People will pause for 2-3 seconds and then look in my direction. I might not be the most well-dressed person in that place, but the way I've stepped into that auditorium commands every other person there to look at me. So when it comes to this craft, you need to come up with your own identity, your own abnormality, as I would say, so that people, even people that have been in the industry for a very long time, will pause for a while and look at what you're doing and what you're bringing in. I think I don't have time again. All right, so that is all for now.
All right, so we'll take questions. We'll have time for questions in case anybody has questions.
It's for my content, the YouTube content that we want.
So let's take it short.
It's for my YouTube content.
Okay, no questions. So
You can always check it on the I'll give you a channel. Okay.
I used to say black eyes. Is that the black eyes? Black eyes. Yeah. Black eyes is we don't have it in this country, but we're not used to. We don't have snow. If after winter, and then if the snow flakes is going off, there's this thing that it forms on the floor. It's glazy, kind of. Sometimes you won't even see it, but it's there and it's dangerous. You understand? So you step on it, you probably slip off. So at that particular time, they ask that people shouldn't go out and they don't drive on it because it's actually very slippery, you know. And what brought about that is when it comes, we believe that when it comes to this craft, we are dangerous.
all right, let's play the video.
She's carrying it.
So this is a project we're working on. It's just a character review.
You set fire to your skin. You turn around, they explain why you are.
That's a powerful one. Powerful one. Thank you for showing us this. Let's give you a round of applause. You use motion capture, right?
Yes, I do.
Nice one.